Absolutely one of my favorite topics in the world to talk about here. And so we a number of years ago, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but a number of years ago, we here at Chicago Ornithological Society launched what's known as the Chicago Nighthawk Project. Well, guess what? Time has passed, and we are now entering the fifth year of that project. So woo! Streamers, fireworks. So we're very, very excited. But when we were talking at the beginning of the year about what this year would look like and how we're going to go big, we decided what better way to celebrate this awesome milestone by making this a theme throughout the calendar year for 2026. So this is our first event in the year of the Nighthawk. So I get to officially welcome you all to our Year of the Nighthawk. Here we are, off to the races. This is our first program. Super excited to start things off this way with a nice virtual program. I do want to note that while this is the first, it is certainly not the last by any shot. We have several awesome trips and programs planned through the rest of the year here to celebrate Nighthawks and their larger family of nightjars. So certainly this month we're going to be doing this program both here virtually, which is where you guys are, and in person at a couple locations as well to talk about our amazing Nighthawks. And we'll get into that more in a minute. We've also got some really awesome partners from across the country who are going to be presenting as well. So next month we have some fellow researchers up in Canada who will be sharing some of their work that they've done with Nighthawks in their habitats, a little bit more remote and less urban than ours, but still very directly related, and specifically highlighting some of the work they've done to put satellite tags on Nighthawks and illuminating some of the first ever full migratory routes that we've been able to discover with these birds. Another one of those virtual programs is in July. We have some colleagues from New Hampshire Audubon up in New England and New Hampshire who have been looking at the steep declines of nighthawks in their area, but also doing some special work on gravel rooftops and trying to reintroduce gravel roofs as a form of habitat for nighthawks. Bit of a spoiler there for the program, but I think it's really cool. We also have a couple of really cool field trips coming up. In June, we'll be doing a kind of group Nighthawk crawl of sorts to do a Nighthawk monitoring route and also, potentially see Nighthawks. At least fingers crossed. That's the idea. In August, we'll be doing what has become our annual tradition, our Nighthawk migration watches, where we go and have basically a big picnic and wait for Nighthawks to migrate over. It's a really great time. We have a big group out. We get to just hang out and geek out, have some good food, and watch for Nighthawks as they migrate over during their southbound migration. And then last but not least, in October, we are going to be doing a field trip to the Field Museum where they're going to be taking us behind the scenes to show us their extensive collection of nighthawks and nightjars from around the world. So while you may or may not be able to find these birds anywhere else in the world because, if you can't travel or on a budget or whatever, you can go to the Field Museum with us in October and you can explore the nightjars from across the planet right here at home in Chicago with the awesome collections and facilities there. We also want to thank especially the artist behind our new Chicago Nighthawk Project logo. Check it out. Some super sweet artwork there. It is not available in our merch shop just yet, but it will be available as a t-shirt and a couple of other cool items in that shop once we get that all set up. It's a new store. We're still figuring out the kinks, but that will be available soon. You can slap that on a t-shirt and rock that look there if you're just about excited as showing your Nighthawk love as I am. You can also you can ditch your OG Nighthawk t-shirt like I have here from the Art Institute. They kind of beat me to it, but we'll have some new ones coming along the way. And if you'd like to learn more about any of these events, about the merch when it becomes available, about the Nighthawk Project, you can just scan that QR code down there, get a good view of everything as it's coming up, sign up for things as they become available. We would love to see you on any one, if not all, of these future programs. So, with that said, I will go ahead and get going here with the main course. Saving the Uncommon Nighthawk here. This is a program that has been put together over the course of a number of years here, as we've continued to learn about these birds, do research, learn from our own monitoring efforts here in the city. We've come together and put together a lot of information that we have both learned from these birds more broadly, but then also on a local level here. So what I want to do here today is first just talk about nighthawks broadly, talk about what they are, who they are, what has been our understanding of them over the last couple of centuries, even. And then once we get into that and kind of go over the basic facts, information about these birds, we'll talk a little bit more about the project itself and what we have learned here in Chicago specifically. What it comes down to for me, though, in a sort of more broad philosophical perspective, is my job here tonight is to convince you that nighthawks are the coolest, most mysterious, and most urban creature you will meet here today. I know it's a tall order, but I think I'm up to the task here. So let's get into it. Take a moment. Go ahead and close your eyes if you want, doing a little imagination exercise with me. Imagine a world. It's summer, maybe a nice summer evening. You're smelling the smells. You're hearing the calls of insects, birds. Sun's going down. It's nice and warm. It was kind of warm today, but even better. Now imagine that, and imagine a world where these guys are your best friends, and you got the night shift. Boo! Or should I say, bah? You're a goat herd. Surprise! Now, you as a goat herd, you are out here tending to your flock. The sun's going down. You're doing whatever it is goat herds do, setting down for the night. You got your bread and cheese. I don't know. And you notice that as the sun goes down and the sounds of the day start to disappear, all your familiar sights and sounds start to go to bed for the night, you notice that the world changes. And all of a sudden, things that you never saw during the daytime, shapes and shadows that are flying fast and furious, where if you shine your light or your torch on them, their eyes glow red, have all these kind of funky sounds, and they're specifically going after one thing. They're flying around your herd of livestock. What the heck? Turns out these mysterious birds are nightjars. But at points in time throughout history, this was not understood. When the creatures like this, that are mostly dark and camouflaged, practically demonic looking, that you never see during the day, they only come out as the sun is setting, basically the witching hour. My oh my, the imagination runs wild, doesn't it? And that is demonstrated in its naming. The whole name for the nightjar family is Caprimulgidae, which literally means goat milk. It was believed that these birds, these creatures, whatever they were actually sucking the milk from livestock, from goats, from cattle, whatever it was. And of course, we being the curious and funny creatures that we are, when we don't understand things, we come up with all kinds of creative names and explanations for what they are. This right here is a short list, not even the full list, the short list of the different names that I have found to describe the same bird. These are all different kinds of names that have been developed over the years to describe nighthawks or nightjars, depending on where in the world you are. Some of my favorites are dewfall hawk. That's really cute. I like that. Or gabble ratchet. I don't even know what that is. What I got nothing. I don't know. Corpse hound. Okay, it's a little morose, but fair enough. Flying toad, that's one of my favorites. I mean, if you see in a bird's mouth, you get the toad reference. We'll get to that. I think one of my favorites is the fern owl. Love that one. Cool. And of course, you got other classics like razor grinder. Sure. Okay. Again, don't get it, but this is just a smattering of the different ways in which we have tried to grasp and understand this group of birds that have been very elusive and difficult to understand and get our fingers around. And of course, when you're talking about a species that basically their whole MO is they come out when the sun is setting, the twilight hour. I mean, my goodness, what kind of artistic inspiration could you possibly look for beyond that? This is a smattering of different artists who have written or drawn or created pieces specifically around nighthawks that were inspired by nighthawks in their artistic endeavors. Some really classic authors here who have put together amazing pieces over the years. And then, of course, even today, they still continue to inspire us. This is a poll that was taken from Twitter. And yes, I still call it Twitter. It will always be Twitter in my heart. So even today, we still find them a little bit kind of spooky and weird. I'm a little disappointed that the vultures won, but you know what? That's fair. The internet gets the final say on these things. So the reason that I'm starting here with the funny names and the general poor perception of these birds over the years is because I think it really sets the stage for what we know today, how we understand these birds today. The reality is that myths and legends, the things that we use to try to explain the world around us, are just that. They're rooted in real experiences of ways that we can't fully understand, but trying to understand, trying to slot it into our understanding of the world around us. This artistic piece here is a great example. This is what the perception of was of nighthawks and nightjars for the longest time. They were right up there as awful with snakes and other things that go bump in the night. But when you have a species that's what they do, they are elusive. They come out at night. They make it their whole business of being not detected and not seen. You can understand then why our creative juices really get going, why we come up with crazy stories for what the heck they're doing, why we come up with crazy names to explain what the heck those things are. I want to highlight this guy right here. This is a fellow named Gilbert White. He's most notable and known for the fact that he's considered the first ever natural history author, the first ever naturalist. He wrote this book called The Natural History of Selborne County in England, and it's considered the first work of natural history ever, where he basically spent an entire year documenting the phenology of his county and the wildlife in his county. But and you can still get this book today. Honestly, I recommend it. It's an interesting read, even written back in the 1800s. But one of the interesting things that he wrote comes from this book, and I'd like to share, is about nighthawks. The country people have a notion that the fern owl is very injurious to weanling calves, but the least observation and attention would convince men that these birds neither injure the goat herd nor the grazer, but are perfectly harmless and subsist alone on night insects. Nor does it anywise appear how they can inflict any harm among kind unless they possess the powers of animal magnetism and can affect them by fluttering over them. So this is one of those early examples where the sort of Enlightenment age, we're starting to finally pick up on the fact that maybe they're not just random demon birds out to suck the milk from your goats. Maybe there's actually an explanation for this understanding of these species, why they do what they do. Just maybe. I do want to share a little actually interesting add on here because immediately after this phrase, he goes on to say, "It is the hardest thing in the world to shake off superstitious prejudices. They are sucked in, as it were, with our mother's milk and make the most lasting impressions, become so interwoven into our very constitutions that the strongest good sense is required to disengage ourselves from them." I know he was talking about nighthawks, but man, those are some 200-year-old words of wisdom for the modern era, are they not there? So, moving on. We know that there's a long history of misunderstanding these birds. We know there's a long history of trying to figure out what the heck they're doing with very little information. What do we know today? Now, with the benefit of modern knowledge and modern scientific practices, and even just putting together and aside our prejudices, what is the truth about nighthawks and about these birds? Well, if we zoom out real quick, let's talk about the nightjars family in general. This is the class of birds of which nighthawks are a part. They are a class of about 100 or so species found all across the planet. Most environments that you go to, you can probably find at least one species of nightjar that inhabits it, basically other than the polar regions and the most extreme environments like the deep deserts like the Sahara. A couple of highlights here that I like to share. His really awesome name here is the Satanic Nightjar. I I don't know why it's called that. It looks really cute to me, but it's a wicked name. I mean, talk about something that's ready for like a metal band name or something. The other one here you got is the Standard Winged Nightjar. I didn't include it in this presentation here, but I highly recommend going to see if you can find a video on YouTube or whatever your preferred online video service of choice is. Try to see if you can find a video of these birds in flight. Those big black blobs behind the bird are part of the wing. Those are there's two of them, two single shaft feathers that extend from the back of the wing of the bird and flutter behind the nightjar while it's in flight. Most research suggests that it probably serves one of two purposes, if not both. First, as a mating display, it shows your potential fitness to a potential mate. Hey, look at me. I've got this basically caboose that's slowing me down and I haven't been eaten yet. Mate with me. But also, There's the theory that because they flutter behind them, it looks like there's a separate bird or bat behind this individual bird. So if a predator is chasing it, it will go after and try to capture the fluttering feathers behind the bird versus the bird itself. Fun little facts about them. But how about some of these other ones that are very hard to discover or study here? How about the Voorhees nightjar? Voorhees nightjar is a species that was first discovered and collected in an island in Indonesia. That's the specimen you see right there. That is the only specimen of that bird. In fact, actually, that's the only evidence that that bird ever existed. Yeah, that's right. That bird's never been seen. That bird's never been heard, except for this one specimen that was collected in the 1800s. That is the only evidence that we have that we ever shared the planet with that species of nightjar. Are they still out there waiting to be discovered? Are they already extinct? Who knows? Or how about this crazy one here, the Netchazar nightjar? This is a species that lives in the Ethiopian highlands. It's an area of the African continent that is extremely remote, very, very hard to access and get to. So there's a whole lot of different taxa and scientific interests in the region there. And on a collecting expedition in the early 90s, some individuals found that wing on the side of a road, the side of a dirt road. And they're like, oh, hey, well, I mean, it's there. Might as well grab it, throw it in a bag, and take it back, and we can analyze it later. When they brought it back to their collection in England, they did some analysis and they realized, holy cow, this is a new species to science. We have never seen anything like this. It doesn't match any known species of nightjar. Here's the plot twist with this one. That is the only evidence that we have that species ever existed. This bird's never been seen. This bird's never been heard. We don't even have an entire specimen, at least like the Voorhees. That wing is the only evidence that we share this planet with that species. Insane. Now, normally when I give this presentation, I'd stop there and move on to the next species. However, there actually is some very new information about that wing, about Netchazar nightjar. There was a paper that was published last year, I believe, that did genetic analysis on this wing and brought to light some new information about the Netchazar nightjar. Turns out, it's not a new species. Womp womp. Bummer. However, it is still unique and special. Turns out what we thought was the Netchazar nightjar and why it was confused as a new species is because it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid of two known species of nightjars in that area. And you might be thinking, okay, well, cool, but bummer, not a new species. Here's the kicker. The fact that that exists is now the first ever known evidence of hybridization in Old World nightjars. So even if it's not a new species, it still is a first to science. We, up until this point, had no evidence or knowledge or confirmation that Old World nightjars would hybridize. That wing is the evidence of it. So even here today, in our year of our Lord, 2024, 25, whatever, we are still discovering new things about these birds that were simply unknown before, even after all this time. There's a lot that we still don't know and understand about this entire family of birds. And then, of course, you move over to our bird right here, the common nighthawk. Despite its name, common, despite the fact that it is pervasive all across the continent, despite the fact that it is probably one of the best studied of all of the nightjar species, there's still so much that we don't understand even about this bird. There's lots that we don't understand about migratory routes. There's lots that we don't understand about where they travel to. We don't, for example, know the difference between male and female vocalizations, if there are any distinctions. There's so much more about these birds that we don't understand, even though they are our friendly neighborhood bird. We don't have to go on some distant expedition to a remote area to see and observe them. So given all of that, even today, there's still so much that we don't know about this entire family of birds, and they're hard to study. They're highly camouflaged. Their whole existence is at night. They're hard to study. I get it. And so that's where a lot of this work comes in. Now, if we hone in again on our local area here, we have two nightjars that are found in the Chicago area. You've got the eastern whippoorwill and the common nighthawk. The eastern whippoorwill is our forest bird. So of these two species, whippoorwills are forest specialists. They prefer oak woodlands. Around here especially, they prefer specifically black oak woodlands. So not like, a bur oak forest or a white oak forest, black oak specifically. There's a couple of reasons for that, and there's actually active research happening at the University of Illinois that's trying to tease that out and understand why is it that they prefer black oak forest versus any other forest in the area specifically. There's some early research that suggests that possibly those areas are less prone to insecticide absorption and therefore not killing off their food as much, but that's super early and hard to say. I also want to give a quick shout out, if you didn't notice already, that whippoorwill photo. There's more than one bird in there. I'll let you guys squint at that and ponder that one there. And then, of course, we have our common nighthawk. Common nighthawks, in contrast, are grassland birds. And I say that with air quotes, but we'll leave it there for now. They are the grassland birds. You're not going to find them most of the time in forests and dense woodlands and vegetations. That's not their preferred environment. They prefer open, broad expanses compared to their whippoorwills. Both these species can be found pretty much year-round in the Chicagoland area. Whippoorwills are much less common, though. In fact, there is no known case of a whippoorwill breeding anywhere in the city proper. There are a couple of few scattered records of whippoorwills breeding in Cook County and then in surrounding counties. They do come through and during migration in slightly higher numbers, and sometimes you can catch them, but they're an exceptionally rare and uncommon bird in our area these days. Nighthawks, in contrast, are much more common and pervasive throughout the Chicagoland metro area. So let's do a little bit more myth busting here. Most of these all apply to the whippoorwill as well, but I'm referring to nighthawks at this point more specifically. All of these species are crepuscular. So what does that mean? Yes, they are active at night, but more specifically, their peak time is the sunrise and sunset periods. They will go all night long, but that activity decreases depending on the environmental factors. They really like that period where the light is dwindling, but there's still just enough to really maximize the fact that they are visual predators. They use that eyesight, and so they use that low light conditions to give them an advantage on the different food sources they're going after. Speaking of food, they're aerial insectivores. That means that they eat bugs on the wing. Again, all of our nightjars are aerial insectivores. They are eating a variety of different insects depending on their environment and what kind of habitats and ecologies they live in, but all of them capture bugs on the wing. Some of them continue to stay on the wing like swallows. Others will fly out, capture something, and sally back like a flycatcher. But all of them are insect eaters on the wing. Interesting little feature of the entire family of nightjars is that all of these birds have the ability to go into a state of torpor, which is a form of short-term hibernation. And when I say short-term, we're talking basically a couple-hour bursts. All of these birds have the ability to essentially slow down their metabolisms to a point where they're almost asleep functionally or in hibernation for these short periods of time. And this is to allow birds to weather periods of activity where maybe food isn't as readily available or weather conditions are really poor, and allows them to basically conserve their energy reserves before they go out and try to burn energy pursuing prey and food. They can sometimes string together multiple sessions of torpor, but ultimately at some point they do still have to get up and fly out and look for food. None of them can do it for long extended periods of time. There is one exception to that. The common poorwill, which is found in the southwestern U.S., does actually have the ability to go into a proper actual hibernation for multiple days at a time. Ground nesting. These birds are, just like the title says, ground nesting. You're not going to find them building nests in trees. You're not going to find them building nests, in a bush somewhere. They are going to be on the flat ground. Most of these nests involve doing basically nothing. Find a little depression, drop some eggs in it. These birds, their entire existence is reliant on their incredible camouflage, and the same thing goes for their eggs. So in the case of whippoorwills, they're going to find a pile of leaf litter, drop their eggs in the leaf litter, blend right in. In the case of nighthawks, they're going to nest, create a small depression in either dirt or gravel or things like that, some kind of sandy substrate, and lay their eggs in there. And this is, again, a case all across the entire nightjar family. All of them are ground nesting in some capacity. Migratory. Both whippoorwills and nighthawks are migratory in our area. They do pass through starting basically in mid to late May, spend their summers here, and then start migrating out starting even as early as July, but really peaking in late July or late July, mid-August, and then being done and completely out by end of August, early September. What's interesting about these birds is they're often described as the last to arrive and the first to leave. While that's not strictly true, it is true enough to be able to give you a sense of how little time these birds actually spend with us. By the time that whippoorwills and nighthawks get here, or even begin considering migrating, pretty much every other species of migratory bird has begun moving at some point or another, or even completely passed us by and moved through. Like I said, you're not really going to reasonably expect to see either of these species in our area until at least mid-May, maybe early May if the weather conditions are crazy or they get blown here a little bit early. And once again, they're leaving fairly early as well. By the time you hit the end of August, it's very rare to be seeing either of these birds in this area. You might get a few lingering individuals into early September, but it's very, very rare at that point. I also want to note that even though we talked about this and that is featured in their scientific name, they don't drink milk. Want to just, make sure that that was really clear. I wasn't beating around the bush on that one. They don't drink milk. They're not milk drinkers, despite that big maw there that looks like it's, I guess suitable for sucking milk from a goat. I don't know. I guess I get it, sort of. I do also want to note, though, that I have not had a chance to confirm with Jim Henson or the Muppet Company whether or not they are closely related to Muppets. They might be, TBD. I'll let you know when I figure that out. But again, look at that Muppet mouth. My God. That might as well be Kermit's cousin right there. Like I said, pending research on that one. So earlier I said that nighthawks are grassland birds with air quotes. And the reason I say that is because you're not really going to find a nighthawk in a dense tall grass prairie. It's not really their preferred habitat. It's not where they like to hang out. They get kind of drowned out in that space there. They prefer open, sparse landscapes. So while, yes, they technically might qualify as a grassland, it's more of a specific subset of grassland and open space that allows for them to blend in with coarser substrates. You can see in that bird in that photo there, they're going to be blending in with dirt, with sand, with scrubby bits, with shells, any kind of those features of the landscape that they can get really low down to and blend in with. And you can see in that upper photo with those eggs there, shout out to that piece of rebar in the top of the frame, those eggs are blending right in with those rocks and pebbles and shells right there in what I assume is a construction zone. So they have this preference for these rough, sparse environments. There's even some evidence to suggest that even recently burned landscapes might be really suitable for them. They will migrate into and at least temporarily occupied burned forests and things like that because these areas are, again, very sparse, thin for them. They blend in really nicely. Now, I hinted at this earlier. I gave a little bit of a spoiler as we were talking at the very beginning of the program here. But what does another suitable environment in a city that looks like a sparse bird grassland serve as habitat? Anybody recognize where that photo was taken? I'm going to leave a nice long pause here. What's another place that looks like a sparse grassland that you can find in a city?
A roof.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. Yeah, rooftops. You can kind of see in this photo that sort of black tar vinyl, whatever material there. That's the edge of a rooftop. And shout out to that adorable little nighthawk baby there. Aw. Yeah. Did somebody say roof? No. Aww. Rooftops. Did somebody say roofs? Yeah. Gravel roofs make excellent nesting habitat. As it turns out, these environments where we have all of these rocks and pebbles in a very large, flat expanse with no other obstructions, no other tall trees or anything like that, mirrors their preferred nesting habitat really nicely. It's fantastic for them. The crazy part is this is not new. This is not some, oh man, in the last 20 years, they just seem to really showed up. The earliest record of a nighthawk nesting on a roof goes back to 1869. Do you know what was happening in 1869? The first transcontinental railroad was built. The country was barely the full country that we understand it as today. This is a period not long after the Civil War when urban environments are not built for wildlife. Heck, they're barely built for people at this point. These are dirty, gnarly places that are built for industry and productivity. I mean, in some cases, barely livable, smoggy, awful places. However, despite all of that, this crazy bird saw an opportunity. Nighthawk saw an opportunity where no other wildlife was even on the radar to turn urban environments, however gnarly they were, into habitat, places where they could be successful and evolve and adapt to raise their young and build their population. This is why I always make the case that despite a lot of other more charismatic species, a lot of other more pervasive species, more visible species being very notably associated with cities, I would argue that nighthawks are actually the original urban wildlife. Long before the field of ecology was even created, long before the study of these fields began, long before the term urban wildlife was even coined, these birds were already doing it. They were already in these urban environments being urban wildlife and taking advantage of the environments that we as humans created. I think that's incredible. They really are the original urban wildlife to me, and I'm going to stick to my guns on that. Now, nesting on rooftops, other than just looking cool, presents numerous benefits. The biggest ones being nobody's up there. At least when you're nesting on the ground proper, your camouflage does a lot for you, but you're still vulnerable to the passing coyote or the passing raccoon or heck, even the passing human. But on a roof, you have none of those things. Even if it is a human structure, how often are humans up there? Almost never. They lay their rooftop and then they leave it alone until something actually needs to be dealt with or managed. So these spaces are completely uninhabited. There's no natural predators in the spaces. They really have it all to themselves. And then, of course, if you're in an area that's urban with lots of open rooftops, there's also probably lots of lighting fixtures around. And what do lighting fixtures attract? Bugs. Lots and lots of bugs. So not only do you have this habitat that is perfect for you to lay eggs and blend in with, but you've got a buffet all around you, ready to go food to feed those young and roll with. So really, in some ways, the urban rooftop kind of is the perfect nighthawk habitat. I don't know if we'd be able to still call that a grassland, but it works. It gets the job done. And this is actually something that was featured in a recent edition of American Bird Conservancy's Bird Conservation magazine. They did a story on birds that specifically highlight not only just live in natural areas, but actually, natural areas, urban areas, but actually highlight which ones live in around stadiums, sporting events. Nighthawks were one of the features in there, and they actually talked to us about our project. One of the inspirations for me studying Nighthawks was going to White Sox games. And on those evenings, summer evenings at a baseball game, you've got Nighthawks that will fly around the stadium lights at night. And that was always such a really fascinating, stark experience for me, being in the stadium with thousands of people screaming their heads off and shoving hot dogs down their throats. And then in the meantime, in the sky, while the Sox are getting their butts kicked, you see these Nighthawks just quietly flying around above you, doing their thing, living their lives right next to ours. That's where the title for the program comes from, Arena Birds, because they are such a common fixture of arenas and stadiums all around the country. Now, we do have to point out that despite this adaptability, despite this long history living in urban environments, they have a questionable future. Population trends across the species population are not looking good. In the US, they're down significantly. In Canada, they're down significantly. Numbers in Chicagoland, not entirely known at this point. A couple of places they're even listed as birds of concern or even endangered. You've got Bird Conservation Network, our local bird monitoring organization. They listed as a bird of concern. In Canada, they're listed as threatened at this point. And in several states in the Northeast, the numbers have plummeted so badly to the point where there are entire areas of New England that just straight up do not have them anymore. They're critically imperiled in all those states listed there. This is I should probably update this. Whoops. This is some recent-ish data that shows the U.S. breeding bird survey for nighthawks across the country. Again, really illustrating that point. There are very few places where these birds are doing well. Pretty much all across the range, they are declining to some extent or another. And I wanted to throw a few quotes in here that I think really illustrate this problem well. So BCN, Bird Conservation Network, recently released a trends analysis for all of their breeding bird survey data. And this is what they had to say about nighthawks. This species is poorly monitored by the survey, but anecdotal data indicates considerable declines in our region. Considerable declines. Okay, not great. Or how about this one? Birds of the World. This is the authoritative encyclopedia on, well, birds of the world. It has people who are experts at each of those species write out entries with all the most recent information and data on these species. And here's what they had to say. Recent, albeit limited, breeding bird survey data suggests a substantial decline in numbers of this species. Yikes. Okay. They go on to say, although arguably the most studied nightjar in North America and one of the best known in the world, the common nighthawk remains poorly understood. That is a typo. Remains poorly understood. Most studies of this species have been short-term and anecdotal in nature, and specific data about much of its life history remain scarce. Ugh. Okay. Not great. Doesn't look good. We got to do something about this. That's where the Chicago Nighthawk Project comes in. Shortly after the BCN trends analysis was released, I got together with a couple of colleagues and we said, all right, what are we going to do? We know that there is a major gap here in our knowledge. We know that there is more that needs to be done. How are we going to address it? And so we came up with this project. We came up with a simple protocol. We started recruiting volunteers, and we went out there to see what we could discover. At the end of the day, the goals of the project are relatively simple. First and foremost, survey distribution across the city and the greater Chicagoland area overall. Where the heck are these birds? We know they're out there, but do we even really fully understand where in the city they are? Where are they and where are they not? Where have we gained them? Where have we lost them? That's not really a thing. Then, once we know that, identify the factors that affect their presence. Do they prefer neighborhoods with lagoons? Do they prefer neighborhoods with more parking lots? Again, we can't really say that. We don't know. We just don't know. We can throw out theories. We can postulate all we want, but we just simply do not know. What makes a neighborhood a Nighthawk neighborhood versus one that is not? And then lastly, once we get all that information together and identify those factors, figure out, well, how do we keep them around? How do we create essentially a conservation strategy, a city-focused conservation strategy for this species? If we know what they like, how do we keep those factors around? Or even better, reintroduce those factors where maybe they've been lost to ensure that we can keep these birds around. So the protocol is actually pretty simple. It's a simple 5-minute count at 4 or more, if you prefer, points that you visit around the dusk hour. We do it once each week for 3 weeks. So ultimately your commitment is just 3 days in the entire month of June. We target the month of June because that is nesting and territory season. That is the time of the year when birds are going to be on territories. They're going to be consistent, easier to find, and they're not going to be ranging too far outside of that territory. Monitoring takes place on calm evenings, preferably when the moon is out or some, decent amount of light in the space there. Cloud cover is low, and there's not really high winds. Turns out the protocol works. All you need to do is 5 minutes. So when we go out to look for these birds, what are we looking for? Well, I've got a couple of videos here to demonstrate what these birds look like in flight. All right. So if you're trying to identify a nighthawk in the field, what were some of the field marks that you saw in that video there? What are some of the things that you might key in right away to tell you that that's a nighthawk? It's not a test, but I am curious. Yeah, there we go. We got a couple of responses right off the bat there. Those white bars on those wings. Those kind of racing strips along the sort of wrist of the bird. That is a very diagnostic look right there. There are very few, if any, birds in our area that have any kind of substantial white patches like that underneath and on top of the, for that matter, the wing like that. So if you see that, pretty darn good indicator you're looking at a nighthawk. Nighthawk. What else? What else do folks notice? Hey, there it is. Took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, the birds look like a boomerang. I love that analogy because these birds are very long, narrow winged birds. They're not very large physically. Think basically a super skinny pigeon, but those wings are super long and super skinny and look like kind of a boomerang all across, all things considered. Those wings are so long that when they sit on the ground, the wings themselves actually project well beyond the back end and tail of the bird itself. That is how long and spindly those wings are. Some other things to look for, the fact that that flight pattern is just super wacky and erratic. And the reason for that is because these birds are, well, going after wacky and erratic prey. If you're going after something like a dragonfly or a fly or a cicada, these things are really maneuverable. So you're going to have to see these birds moving around at the turn of a dime to go after the food that they're looking for here. So here's another video, again, demonstrating these birds in flight here. You can see those white markings on the wings. You can see that erratic flight. You can see those boomerang-like wings extending well beyond the bird there. Hanging out on this overpass here. Awesome. So now you might be thinking, oh, well, that's great, Edward, but what if I go out at night? How am I going to see these birds? Great question. You might not. In fact, very frequently when we're out monitoring for these birds, we never actually see them. And that's just part of the challenge. If you're lucky, especially working around large light features, they should be visible. But in areas where that's not available, you might not see them at all. But you can probably hear them. Thankfully for us, Nighthawks have two calls, and they're extremely simple. No complex song to try to learn and memorize. They don't really sound like anything else out there, so they're not going to be really confused with anything else out there. These are very easy birds to listen for. They have two primary calls. And I'm going to play some audio here that has both of them. We have the jeer call and we have the boom call. Let's see if we can hear them both. All right. So you should have heard both calls in there. And I realize now if I was going to accept your challenge to imitate the calls myself, I should have done it before you heard it. Because now you've heard the real thing, and I could never measure up to the real thing. Um, gosh, I think the boom call is the one that I kind of always describe. It sounds like a drive-by truck, like a kind of sound. So there you go. You're welcome for that. Um, but there you go. So both calls. You heard both calls there. The jeer call or the peep call. That's that high, raspy kind of call. I wasn't gonna do it, but then I couldn't help myself. I did it. Anyway, and then you've got the boom call, which is like I said, that sort of drive-by truck sound. What's interesting about these calls is the jeer call. That is the more common call. They're going to be doing that pretty much all summer long. Wherever you go, you will hear them doing that. That call doesn't have a specific role that we're aware of. It's supposed to be a kind of, hey, I'm here. Maybe it's announcing themselves to a mate. Maybe it's marking territory and letting other birds know you're in my territory. But that's something that they'll be basically spamming all summer long. In contrast, the boom call is a unique call in that A, it is not a vocalization. It's actually a sound effect created by the birds diving and forcing air through their wings in a specific way. So the boom call is really a diving call, much the same way that woodcocks create a whistling sound when they do their sky dance. It's not a vocalization, it's forcing air through the wings to create an auditory effect. The second part about the boom call that's interesting is that that is not a call you're going to hear wherever, whenever. That is specifically a mating call, as far as we understand it. It is something that they only do early in the breeding season to potentially impress mates. Where it gets even crazier is that recent research, just within the last 4 or 5 years, has shown that that boom call doesn't even just happen anywhere on territory. It actually happens within a very specific circle around a nesting site. So using boom calls, you can actually pretty closely pinpoint where potential nesting sites are for nighthawks. So it's very important when you hear that call to log that, to make a note of that, because that can be a potentially really good indicator that we are very close to a nesting site. So been pointed out in the chat that you couldn't actually hear the boom until I explained what it was. Let me go ahead and play that audio again. So now you know what you're listening for. The kind of song. There you go. That was it right there. The boom call. Crazy to think that that's a bird making that sound. All right. So the first year of the protocol, we went out there with a number of volunteers, checked a bunch of locations across Chicago and some of the outer areas, especially in Kane County, to see what we could find. We tested the pilot protocol out. We had no idea if it was going to work. We kind of based it on some loose protocols that were done elsewhere in the country and repurposed it for our unique purposes. Turns out it works. We found nighthawks. You can see in that rough map over there, all the X's are obviously areas where we didn't see nighthawks, but all the little birdie icons are places where we did. Um, Definitely shout out to the amazing 16 volunteers who came out that first year to just take a flyer on us. We didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't know what we were going to get out of it, but they wanted to try. They went out there and made it possible and showed us, heck yeah, this protocol works. I want to give a special shout out to our friends over at Kane County Audubon who have been involved since the very beginning. That's that weird stretch over there on the far left side of the map. They organized a bunch of volunteers at select points all along the Fox River in their area to get folks out to cover basically that entire stretch of river. So they've been really awesome partners since the beginning of this project in helping us expand the reach and range of this project. Oh, I think I. There we go. As you can see, our monitoring results continue to grow. Every year we've gotten bigger and bigger. I haven't had a chance to put the 2025 data in here yet, but it is, again, even bigger, more monitors, more locations, and generally speaking, good consistent data on nighthawks. Now, looking back at the last 4 years, as I said, we're entering our 5th year now, but looking at the last 4 years now, aggregate all that data together, you get a better visual here. This is a map that was put together by one of our colleagues at the Lincoln Park Zoo and the Urban Wildlife Institute, another really fantastic partner who's been taking our data and helping us analyze it and try to make sense of what we're discovering with our volunteers. So you can see here in this map, the areas where there are gray dots, those are areas where folks have been finding nighthawks, and the black dots are ones where there haven't been nighthawks. So we're knocking on the door of 300 unique locations across the Chicagoland area that we've had monitors go out to. Over almost 100 volunteers have gone out to do this monitoring. We can't thank them enough because look at this. The scope of what they've been able to accomplish is truly spectacular. We definitely still need to cover more of the city and more of the county and more of the surrounding areas to really get a full scope. But man, have we been off to one banging start. Now, here's some more information and charts that were put together by our colleagues at the Urban Wildlife Institute. I cannot say with confidence at this point that we fully understand, based on our volunteer effort, where these birds are and why they are there. But we're starting to hone in on it. And two stats that are really interesting and have popped out on us as we've continued to look at this information is impervious cover and tree cover. So impervious cover is essentially how much of the environment is paved over versus essentially not paved over. So impervious cover might be somebody's lawn, it might be a local park, it might be a treeway, it could even be just a simple vacant lot. Pervious cover, I guess, is everything else. That's buildings, that's hardscape, that's roads, any of those kinds of features that water cannot seep into but has to run off of. And what you see here is a very clear curve. There's a sweet spot, a point that is emerging where nighthawks like a degree of essentially development, urbanization, But there comes a point where you start having too much of that and numbers start to drop off again. What exactly does that mean? We're not entirely sure yet. We're still parsing that information out, but there is a pattern emerging over the last 4 years of data that is showing that there's somewhere in there this sweet spot for what Nighthawks prefer. Maybe it means that they just really like neighborhoods with lots of two flats and bungalows, but they really hate neighborhoods with skyscrapers. We're figuring out where exactly that line is, but there is clearly a trend emerging there. Another one that really surprised us is tree cover. Despite the fact that we talked extensively about how these are grassland birds, open landscape birds, there does seem to be a point where they do prefer a certain degree of tree cover in these neighborhoods where we find them. Not exactly sure what's behind that. Perhaps it's the kind of thing where tree cover is an indicator for the amount of habitat and insect availability. Nighthawks are not anti-tree, they just don't prefer them. And let's be real, if you're in a neighborhood that has any kind of greenscape, it's probably not going to be because somebody planted a prairie in their front yard. It's probably because they have trees in their front or backyards. So that's our running theory at this time. We still have a lot to figure out based on the information we're getting and what this truly means, but we are starting to see patterns emerge here that we hope to continue to grow on and explore. So what comes next? Well, we still have a lot more monitoring to do. There's still many other parts of the city and the Chicagoland area that have not been monitored. And what's interesting about that too is that there's a lot of areas of the city where, for example, there is no data. Or maybe if you go on eBird, you might see that there's no data for these birds. But the reality is it's often not because there are no birds there. It's usually because nobody has bothered to go looking. I mean, I get it. As birders, most of us, when are we going out to look for birds? We're going out at the time when we can get the most birds. We're going out usually in the morning. We're going to our local natural area or preserve. These are not the places and times where we tend to be able to detect nighthawks. And I'm certainly not, if I'm going out for birding for pleasure, to my local, factory, my local manufacturing park. But those may well be the areas where these nighthawks are, where people are just simply not looking. So we have a lot more to do to fully distribute across the city and really understand where they are and where they are not. We need to get into the data more. We need to determine what these factors are that are driving these birds' presence. We're starting to get a hint of certain things, but there are some other things we need to explore. For example, water features across the landscape. Still not really sure how much that plays into their distribution. Maybe it has nothing to do where they decide to go, but we suspect that it might. And then lastly, how do we create nighthawk habitat? What does that require? What do we need to do? Is the answer that we need to plant more trees, ironically? Is it a case where building more gravel rooftops is in fact the answer? Unclear. But this was not one of those projects where we're doing data for data's sake. That was never the goal. That was never the intention. We don't want to be able to come out the other end of this and say, hey, we collected all this data. Everything sucks. We're losing the Nighthawks. Pat ourselves in the back. No, the goal here is to take this data and actually do something with it. We want this to be an environment where Nighthawks can not only survive and thrive, but potentially persist for generations to come. So what does that look like? How do we manage for Nighthawks in a city? Looking at a little bit further, our good data analysis friend at the zoo provided this map here. Now, this is not a map of observations. This is a map that predicts where potentially nighthawks might be based on the information that we have available to us currently. What's interesting about this map is that, well, yes, it is a predictive map. It's a pretty darn, I would say, close to accurate map, and is definitely a reflection of landscape features that we know already affect these birds. For example, down there in the lower right, there's a big blue patch. That's where Lake Calumet is. Big body of water, large feature there. Probably not going to be as many nighthawks. There's a couple of other river features that start to emerge if you understand the geography, like the Sanitary and Ship Canal, which goes kind of through the southwest side of the city there and county. But the biggest feature that really stands out here is the urbanization. The simple truth here is that if this data is correct, if what we have explored so far continues to hold true, these birds love the city. The farther from the city you get, the more rural, less urbanized you get, the fewer birds you find. That's very telling because that tells us that this is not a case of, oh, well, cities are kind of a fluke and they'll go just about anywhere where there's suitable habitat or, open landscape. That doesn't just tell us that, as gravel roofing becomes a less common practice, we're just simply not going to get them and they spread out across the landscape. No. Even as there is something happening that we know is wrong, we know these populations are dropping, we know that there is something wrong, we know that roofing's is habitat is less common. Even with all of that, these birds want to live in this city. They want to occupy our urban spaces. They want to live amongst us. So, what can we do about that? Well, there are lots of things that you, as a participant of this program here or watcher of this video recorded later, can do to help. The first one is submit those observations to eBird. Even if it's not part of our project specifically, we refer to eBird for observations to help guide our research, to help figure out where we should or shouldn't go, to figure out if things need following up on. And of course, any information you send to eBird also goes to researchers around the world who might be trying to answer similar questions. So, sitting out in your deck and you hear something fly over at night, throw it in eBird real quick. It can't do anything but help. Another local survey is the Moon, Illinois survey. This is run out of a department at the Department of Natural Resources in the state of Illinois. This sets you with specific driving routes all across the state of Illinois to look for not just nighthawks, but any other nocturnal species as part of that route. That might be something that might be of interest to you, especially outside of the Chicagoland area. Avoiding pesticides. We know the use of pesticides is causing the decline of insects across the landscape. There's a very good possibility that that is a contributing factor to the loss of nighthawks. We don't know for sure, but also we know. Practice sustainable gardening or plant native gardens or native plants, you name it, to support those insect populations. Yeah, even something so simple as a vegetable garden, sure, it's not quite native habitat, but it's a heck of a lot more habitat than turf, than just bare dirt. Anything that you can do to provide habitat for those insects is providing habitat and food for these birds, and of course, countless other species of birds and wildlife along the way as well. And put gravel on your roof? Question mark? We don't know. This is actually an ongoing area of research that is very early and hasn't been fully explored yet, but there might be a possible case where putting gravel out might create the habitat we need for these birds. Let's talk after the program if you want to explore that. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Hopefully you guys got a ton of information more than you previously understood about these birds, but I will open up to questions and comments. And last but not least, I will say we are looking for volunteers for the Nighthawk Project. If you think you got it in you to go out on 3 different nights in the month of June and look and listen for these birds, we would love to have you join the team. You can shoot us an email at nighthawk@chicagobirder.org, or you can scan that QR code to not only see the website where we have all the events I mentioned at the very beginning of this program, but also the protocol for our survey and how to get involved and learn more.